the urgent action has not been forthcoming because climate change, or the elements of climate change don't wait for anybody. People are already suffering. I mean, we recently had the floods in Kerala, water shortages. So it is, in fact, an issue that is really overarching on, I believe, all these goals, and it needs, in fact, more than just as a goal by a few countries or a country. In fact, I believe we require, in fact, the whole humanity, global action. In terms of the stakeholders, the whole world is, in terms of this, our stakeholders. At a global level, we have these agreements which are in the process of being implemented. At regional and sub-regional levels, again, with people and different governments, and we find that it is here strong initiatives are missing. There is, a disconnect in terms of the linkages. And at the national level, of course, the government, the private sector, the civil society, there also, and the community. It's a little better there, but nevertheless, again, there are problems there. In terms of the challenges and mitigation measures, we found that there is a need for harmonization of the policies related to climate change. Whether it's water appears to be a big problem. There's a shortage of water, or water is drying up. Whether it is greenhouse gases, many of the cities are polluted, and disaster and early warning. I think these are major issues where experiences from one country can be transported to the others. So there is this learning, where there's this harmonization. The other issue was capacity building. There appears to be a lack of capacity in terms of the intricacies of the responses to climate change at all levels, whether it's sectoral or at community level. So there is a lot more awareness to be built, and also in terms of the ownership. I think that's very important. Unless we have that, it's going to be very, very difficult to take this forward. Financing, again, it's key. That financing appears to be a very, very serious problem, and the financing is, in fact, it's going to be huge. I mean, most countries, especially in South Asia, we cannot afford. We've got our own national development, and then the financing required for especially impacts of climate change, whether it's a flood, or it's huge, or in terms of watershed protection. So here we were discussing that in terms the developed countries need to keep their commitments in terms of raising this 100 billion by 2020. I believe some 10.3 billion has been raised for the Green Climate Fund, but a lot more is required. And we discussed how at a country level we could also contribute, and we were talking of public-private partnerships where, again, businesses private sector could come in and invest in areas, especially if we talk about, if a water shortage, we're talking about the utilities. These are good areas. And also there were views that we need to, in fact, internalize costs so that we make it dear, and people will protect it. Otherwise, if you keep it free, then when it doesn't have value, then there's a lot of wastage. We also discussed about, in terms of there are some transboundary issues. Again, water and watershed protection. That is, rivers don't belong to any country. So upper, lower, riparian. I think there's a need for a lot more work in this in terms of partnerships. We've also talked about air quality, especially with regard to agricultural practices. where burning of certain agricultural materials leads to smog in another country or in another state. So this here also we need to have collaboration. We also talked about disaster management. I think that's another area where, especially early warning systems that need to be established. And we are all, I think, we are learning fast, but yet much more needs to be done. Overall, we've felt that there was a need, in fact, this whole thing about the policy, there's need to formulate a lot more policies, especially at the regional levels. And we need, in fact, to integrate this into the overall process. And I think political will, I think, is needed, especially in this area where it is not just one country. I mean, I know that we have a number of regional groupings, and we have some discussions going on, but I think it's not really taking off. I think a lot needs to be done, especially we are talking about to take urgent action. With that, let me conclude and let me thank members of my group, and let me wish everybody very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you for an excellent presentation on this theme on climate action. May I now request Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chairperson, Sauti, Nepal, Kathmandu. Dr. Poshraj Pandey, please come over. You will be giving the overview of the discussion around SDG 16. 5 minutes, right?
Madam Chair, distinguished panelists, and distinguished participants. Well, it's my privilege to report, on behalf of the working group. And in my working group, we have two panelists, Dr. Jyotsna Mohan and Dr. Nupur Sinha. Basically, we discussed three components of SDG 16, that is namely promote peaceful and inclusive society, provide access to justice, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions. And in our discussion, we agree that harmonious society coupled with respect for human rights and effective governance based on the rule of law is prerequisite for attaining sustainable development goals. Better governance system allows for development of people-centered policies. Effective, transparent, accountable, and responsive institutions are critical for transferring development process. And thus, SDG, we agree that SDG 16 can be conceived as enabler rather than goal by itself. And we agree that without achieving goal 16, achievement of other 16 goals doesn't carry much value. We noted that very few speakers, in previous session, touched upon the issues of Goal 16. In fact, most of the presenters were government officials, and they can't tell lie, but speaking truth may not be palatable to the political masters. So Goal 16 is very sensitive politically. And we also discuss the status of Goal 16 in South Asia. And we agree that the state of social harmony and governance system is not encouraging, and achieving this goal is a big challenge for South Asian countries. And we also while assessing the status of Goal 16, we came up with some numbers. Homicide rates, although significantly lower compared to other regions such as Africa and Caribbean, is still 3.6 per 100,000 population in South Asia. Battle-related deaths have doubled from 10,242 in 2014 to 20,321 in 2017. Total 281,243 people crossed border in 2017 to seek refuge from conflict and fragility. Registration at birth is not available to more than half of the population, except in Bhutan and Sri Lanka, depriving a legal identity and also depriving the basic human rights and government services. Incidence of bribery is quite high, and it has made public to access public, both the common citizen and business people, to access government services. Illicit financial flows from region is huge, and which has limited the finance available for development activities. And it is, and for Bangladesh, total of 5.6 billion US dollar outflowed between 2004 and 2013. Domestic and cross-border human trafficking is high, and in India, total of 8,132 was reported in 2016. Women's political participation continued to be low, and crime against women is on the rise. 31% of South Asian women experienced domestic and other violence. And in India, 338,594 cases of crime against women were reported every year. And LGBTI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people face widespread and often multiple forms of discrimination. And with regard to the rule of law, the Old Justice Project, it has calculated rule of law index based on 4 components. That's accountability, just laws, open government, and accountable and impartial dispute settlement. And South Asia has the lowest score in all of the region, and its score is 0.45 compared to 0.74 for EU and 0.60 for East Asia. Well, and as per the instruction of the organizer, we also identify the stakeholders. And our identified stakeholders are first public representative. That means elected local body officials, parliamentarians, and at federation level, and also province level, and civil society organization, including representative of minority group, LGBT, Dalit, untouchable, Harijan, person differently able, women and children, and private sector, representative private sector, and government, both bureaucracy and executive, judiciary, development partners, knowledge community, and also media. And we also try to identify the various and systemic issues. And the number one is lack of capacity and robust method to measure effectiveness, accountability, inclusion, and responsiveness of the institution. Second barrier is lack of disaggregated data, and sometimes misidentification of the indicators. Here we talk about access to justice, but our indicators are number of courts or judge per 1,000 or 100,000 people, number of cases registered. But here, we should look at the conviction rate. That would be much more appropriate indicators for rule of law. And third constraint is impunity for high-level politicians and bureaucrats and corruptions. But we take actions to lower-level officials and babus. And third is low priority on goal 10. In our plenary session, most of the government officials, they talk about all the other goals, and they are quite hopeful, to achieve those goals. But they didn't touch upon this goal 16, and there is no priority, for this goal 16. And another constraint is we talk about economic empowerment, we talk about political empowerment, but we don't talk about legal empowerment. And without empowering legally, how can we assure justice? That is another challenge. And another constraint is, we have not been able to activate youth for realization or achievement of this goal 16, and particularly on issues of peace, justice, transparency, accountability. That is another challenge. And the next challenge is low priority to capacity building of concerned institutions, and particularly in our case, capacity development of the judiciary systems, and also capacity building of the our police system. That is another challenge. And another challenge is it's our tendency. Instead of empowering local bodies or local community, we try to establish new para-government agencies. We talk about insurances, all these things, but we don't empower our local bodies to do those functions, but we establish insurance company and all these things. Well, with regard to way forward or desired interventions, we have identified some intervention. First and foremost is the creating awareness on the importance of peace, justice, transparency, accountability in the development process. Second, legal empowerment of minority group, particularly Dalit, Harijan, LGBTI, and person with differently abled persons, women, children. Another is strengthening of law enforcement institutions and proper monitoring mechanism of law enforcement. Fourth, strengthening democratization process and making that process much more participatory. Fifth, reducing identity-based discrimination and enactment of anti-discrimination law. Sixth, here to reduce corruption, and basically we focus on government officials. But here we need to encourage and empower whistleblower and also focus on the corruption of the private sector. Next, our recommendation is increase investment in citizen-led accountability